What's good, everybody? This is Dario Hunt from Live My Fearless, and I'm back with another reaction, this time to Netflix and Marvel's The Punisher Season 2. So, let's talk about it. So, I finally did it. I finally finished Season 2 of The Punisher, one of Marvel's last remaining shows on Netflix. And he has always been one of, I think, the better done characters out of everybody that they did have on Netflix. If you want to know my thoughts and feelings about, the show and its general backstory and the character and how they handle it on Netflix, you can go over to the official site and read my original write-ups about Daredevil Season 2, which you premiered in, and Season 1 of The Punisher, because for this season, I'm just going to jump straight into it, and there are slight spoilers ahead, of course. This season is one that I generally liked and enjoyed, but more so for the fact that I think Jon Bernthal is the perfect Punisher / Frank Castle character than the actual direction of the story that they took. But once again, Marvel and Netflix runs into the same problem that I have had with a lot of their follow-up seasons to their other shows, and that is that they rehash it far too much. Because in Season 2, it is still not the Punisher. It is still Frank Castle, and he has still not fully embraced that persona of the Punisher, and he does not do that until the very end of the season. Yes, there are moments that imply that he is basically embraced it, because he always is looking for, conflict and confrontation and places where he can step in and insert himself even though he doesn't need to, but it's never from the perspective or from the Punisher. And that was one of my biggest complaints about Season 1. I was really hoping that we would get more Punisher than Frank Castle this time around, because after basically a season and a half of him trying to figure out who he was after this massive tragedy and trauma, and thinking that he had finally come to embrace the fact that he is who he is, but he is still fighting that very much for the majority of this season. And while Frank Castle is very well portrayed by Jon Bernthal, I just wanted to see more Punisher, and I think most people would agree on that. I think that we kind of deserved it at this point after so much building up to it. Because at least by Season 2 of Daredevil, he had fully embraced being Daredevil. And this is something that applies to one of the main villains of the show as well, Billy Russo, because even though I knew he was coming back for Season 2, I was under the impression that it was going to be more Jigsaw than Billy Russo, but he is still very much just Billy Russo, but more fucked up in the head, which in and of itself is kind of an accomplishment because he was already pretty fucked up in the head. But again, I've always thought that the actor who portrayed him did a very good job, so I'm not mad that he came back. I'm just mad that he wasn't more of what we expected, which was Jigsaw. And I have to say, a big part of that would have helped if his face was more fucked up and more in line with the comic book character that we got, instead of just a few scars here and there. Sure, mentally you can kind of see the trauma and the brokenness of his character. You really just would have wished you would have gotten to see that more on the outside, as it was implied, because I think it would have done much greater effect to see him on this rampage that he was in Season 2. I'm always of the mind that if you are going to do a very comic book character, that he should at least be a comic book character. And even worse about Russo's return was that brought Maidani along with them. And she was by far one of my least favorite parts of Season 1, and quite possibly my least favorite side character out of any of the shows so far. She just seems to suck the life out of any room and any scene she's in. And I don't necessarily blame the actor, because I think she does a good job of portraying a highly traumatized person, but by the way that they write her. Because she is supposed to serve in sort of the same capacity that Misty Knight served in Luke Cage, but whereas in Luke Cage she started out as this very annoying and grating character, she kind of turned out to be a more endearing person because of her tenacity. On this one, she never really evolves from being that annoyance. And she is involved in the story in this season entirely too much. And why they chose to include her even more while leaving out one of my favorite parts of Season 1, which was Micro, was baffling. Because I was really looking forward to seeing their continued dynamic grow and be more in line with the comics, because I thought they did have a interesting back and forth between the two, and I thought he was going to bring so much more for season 2, but to see him completely gone was disappointing. And who he was really replaced by in season 2, which was Amy, really wasn't a step up. It was more of a sidestep and maybe even a step down a little bit. She is just the latest character that Frank needs to save, and I think in the first half of the season she was involved in it entirely too much, and then she just basically disappears for most of the season, then pops up once again. And while I do think she was a much more interesting and compelling character by the end of the season, I don't really like the way that they started it out with her. And in fact, I really don't like the pacing of the story at all, because it felt like two stories in one kind of jammed together, and neither one of them really gets a satisfying end. He never has that one true villain or true entity to fight against. It's always 4 or 5 different interests at one time. And because of this approach, it kind of feels, well, it definitely feels disjointed. And you kind of have those lulls that they always seem to have, where it was just maybe 1 or 2 episodes too long. And because of this, you get new characters like Pilgrim, who definitely do not have enough screen time and enough backstory, because I think there would be a really interesting backstory to him, but we just never get it, because he is basically a complete mirror of Frank himself. It would have been, I think, an interesting dynamic for season 2, and it definitely felt underutilized and underserved. But if you didn't know, he is basically Mennonite from the comic books. But we don't really come to the Punisher just for the story. We really come there for the action sequences and just for all the brutality that it brings. And I'm happy to report that all those action sequences are completely dope and completely well done. And they are brutal as you would come to expect from a character named the Punisher and Frank Castle himself, particularly between him and John Pilgrim, aka the Mennonite, which is why I would have really loved to see a better dynamic between them two. The fight scenes between him and Billy Russo, on the other hand, were far less interesting and a bit underwhelming. But we did get so much that in season 1, I really wasn't looking to get a full-on rehash of what we had already watched. Again, though, none of the sequences quite hit those high levels of Daredevil season 2 with the Punisher, but they do come close, and I do think they were better than season 1. And at the end, when we do get that very comic booky Punisher moment where he is in the trench coat and the full body armor with the skull painted on, blasting 2 fully automatic rifles at a group of bad guys and basically giving out this badass war scream, it was like, finally. And I would love to see this in season 3, but honestly, I would be very surprised if this one gets to season 3, because Netflix is basically canceling every Marvel property that they can, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, I think they did do a good job of wrapping up all the loose ends, so there isn't any dangling threads out there that I particularly wanted to see in season 3. I just wanted to see more of the actual Punisher in season 3, but we might not be getting that, which is, again, a sad, disappointing end to an otherwise great season. But for those of you guys who watched season 2 of The Punisher, what do you guys think about it? How do you think this stacks up compared to season 1? And particularly, how do you think it stacks up to his introduction in Daredevil season 2? Do you wish you got more Punisher moments? Do you think there's a bit too much Frank Castle? Which characters did you really like, and which got more screen time and more backstory? Which ones would you have liked to see that weren't here at all? And which ones did you not want to see here at all and got way too much screen time? My Donna. But let me know in the comments down below, and be sure to head over to the official site where you can leave your own ratings, any reactions to this show, and everything else I react to over there on the site. If you have anything that you personally like me to react to, you can also let me know in the comments down below. And if you like any of the guys I rock in these videos like this, or this, you can also head over to the site and grab some for yourself. As always, thank you guys for joining me. If you're liking these videos, please smash that like and subscribe button for me. I will be back shortly with more reactions, but until then, I will catch you guys soon. Peace.